Hey guys, we're jumping into Philippians 1 today. Aspen and Alexa do an incredible job. They unpack the history of it. They unpack, the points, some key points in the scripture that we can apply to our lives. So without any further waiting, let's check out Philippians 1.
All right, Aspen. So give me some historical context on kind of like the Philippians or just the Philippi church, anything like that.
Yeah, so when we look in Acts 16, we actually see Paul in Philippi, and knowing what was required to start a synagogue in any city. So the way that the Jewish religion worked is there's the big temple in Jerusalem, and then little cities have their own small synagogues that are kind of almost like satellite campuses, is what we would kind of think of them like today. Except they were extremely like a lower scale, not the same as the temple. So in order to start a synagogue in a city, you need at least 10 Jewish males to get together and start this synagogue. And then you're declared like good. So it takes 10 people, 10 men. And in the city of Philippi, there wasn't even 10 male Jewish believers to start a synagogue because there was no synagogue. And so we see Paul visiting Philippi, and because he normally would start when he was trying to spread the gospel, he would start at the synagogue, he would teach from there, and then he would work outward throughout the city in just like his ministry. And so since there's no synagogue in the city of Philippi, he goes down to this riverbank and he assumes that there's probably some people meeting for prayer. Well, there are when he goes, but it's actually a women's group meeting for prayer. And he meets specifically a woman named Lydia, who is a businesswoman. She's got plenty of money. She's I believe, sells cloth fabrics. And so she and him talk about their Jewish beliefs, and he introduces her to the way, which is Christianity. And she and her entire household actually are baptized and saved, basically, their version of being saved at the time. And this catalyst, that's the catalyst for this church in Philippi.
Yeah.
And so we see this city go from one that was so broken and so pagan that there wasn't even a synagogue, there wasn't even 10 Jewish males in the entire city, to now it's on fire for Jesus because of this women's prayer group starting this church, and because Paul went and came in as an apostle and started this ministry. And so Paul writes to the church at Philippi in the letter of the book of Philippians, and we see that they are a righteous, pure church for the most part. There's obviously their own little disagreements in there and ways that they fall short, but they're very holy as a whole.
Wow. That's so good. So how do we get from a point of that to where, okay, so he's imprisoned, he, was on a roll with ministry. I feel like he was on fire. He was, going to trying to find synagogues, and he's what I like to consider Paul as this plant church, a church planner. And
yeah,
and now here he is, he's stuck in prison. And you know what? I think from my perspective, what seemed like an obstacle has become an opportunity for Paul. And I think that's what sets Paul apart from so many other people that were trying to spread the gospel at that time, is that he went into prison with a completely different mindset.
Yeah,
I feel like anyone else would. And so you're like, okay, how would you translate this to our modern life? Him finding peace in his suffering, and him spreading the gospel to not only the other prisoners, but the prison guards and just everybody in there. And so for me personally, I feel like I would use this in the sense of, okay, what if you're in a bad place, or, either mentally or physically? What if you're literally in a place that nobody knows Jesus and I don't even want to be there? How many times honestly, Christians, we got to make a living somehow. You start working at Target, or you start working at Publix, and you're like, man, there's just not a single other Christian here. Nobody shares my beliefs, and you feel like it's an obstacle. But I feel like what we can learn from Paul is that it's actually just more of an opportunity that you can be spreading the gospel. And if not, which you should be, but if not, your life is representation, kind of like how Paul's life was representation for other people.
That's so good. And I think that the key to what you're talking about is the spread of the gospel. When we're reading through the New Testament, we're seeing this transition between Judaism and Christianity. And so they even are a little bit confused, honestly, the people who are believers, because they're coming from this known way of life in these very cultural, traditional customs that they've grown up following, to now having to navigate, okay, well, what does this look like with this newfound belief of Jesus is Lord and the Messiah has come? And so how do I approach life like that? And that's why they're spreading the gospel, and it's spreading so rapidly, is it's going not only to Jews, but now to Gentiles too. And we see this throughout the book of Acts, and the book of Acts is structured to meet this almost purpose of showing us how the gospel spread. And so I'll just name off of a few chapters and verses of where you see this, but from verse 1 of Acts to chapter 6, verse 7, it shows, and this is how the gospel spread more. Then from then until chapter 9, verse 31, again, it recaps and says, and so the gospel spread. Again, to chapter 12, verse 24, it says, and then the church was strengthened and it grew. And so we see this, and it goes on more and more, and I'm not exactly quoting that word for word. So when I say those things, like, just hold that loosely. It says something to that effect. But the church grew, and so even in the book of Philippians, we see this, especially in chapter 1, verse 12, it says, and I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me here has helped to spread the good news. So, like you talked about, how do you think that what has happened to Paul actually helped to spread the good news?
You can tell when there's like a different light about somebody. When they have like the Holy Spirit inside of them, there's just, I feel like personally, there's a clear distinction. And that's where we see Paul. I mean, for example, you have a friend and they get a really bad grade in school, or maybe there's something going on at home. And what should destroy them, actually, when they have joy through that, is an example of how you could also have joy. And I think his life and his consequences for spreading the gospel and his struggles are all pointing to the fact of how good God is. Because if he didn't have God, he wouldn't respond in that way. And I think we see that with our friendships too. If you didn't have God, when stuff hit the fan, you would respond in a different way. And I feel like that's what makes Paul so different. That's what points us to God time and time again, without even being in prison. I mean, even just the persecutions that he faced before that. It's just over and over again we see that because of God, he was able to withstand that and like persevere through that.
Yeah. Well, I think that verse 10 talks about, mentions what really matters. For I want you to understand what really matters. Yeah. But he doesn't explain what is. And so we're invited almost to find out through the book of Philippians. And we see in chapter 2 even humility. We see examples of within this church, because remember, it was written to a church. There is specifically, Paul calls out 2 women who are having disunity and they're fighting. And we don't know exactly all the details about that. That's somewhere in here. It's not, it's chapter 4. And so that he calls us to unity as a church. And so we see that as a theme. There's also, like you talked about, joy and suffering. It's so important. So throughout the book of Philippians, what I would encourage is look for those themes. Look for what really matters and ask the Lord to help you define that.
Yeah, because it has to arise the question, like there's some sort of curiosity of what does he mean by like, it is better to die than it is to live. Like that definitely makes you question. You can't just breeze past that and read that and not have any questions arise.
Yeah.
What was his experience that was so strong and so powerful that he felt that way? And that he said, like, there's more to life than what there is here. We are temporary residents. Doesn't say that here, but that's a common theme in the word. Like, there's more than just right now.
Yeah.
You have to wonder, why does Paul feel that way? And I guess we'll see that as he continues to write through this, but I feel like it's a wake-up call. It really is. If you're not a Christian, it's a wake-up call. If you are a Christian, it's a wake-up call. It's just like, you have to understand there's more.
Yeah.
Not only is there more, there's better. It's way better. And that, for me, reading that, I'm like, okay, it wakes you up. It's like, there's more. I got to be doing more. There's something else here that I might be missing if I'm not meditating on this word.
I love talking about Philippians 1 with you. It was so good. And I hope that anyone who's listening to this was encouraged by just us explaining and talking through what the word spoke to us. So we can't wait to see you guys when we talk about Philippians chapter 2 next week. I'll see you guys later.
Guys, that was super powerful. Hope you enjoyed Philippians 1. Get ready for Philippians 2. But also check out East Coast Christian Center. We'll drop the link below. Check out the Mezzanine. We'll drop a link below. Get plugged in, especially if you're at college, if you're 18 to 30. We want to help you in your next steps with Jesus. Just go to those web pages. It'll help you out. Love you guys. See you in the next video.